always stay curious. That's the slogan that I have basically on every single one of my social profiles on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and also on YouTube. And if you've been really paying attention since the beginning of the year, then you may have realized that in many of my earlier videos that I actually had that phrase hung up behind me on the wall, not in this apartment, but my other one back home. And the reason why I have this hung up on my wall is that it's meant to be a constant reminder that no matter what the situation is, if you stay curious, you will eventually adapt to new situations and you will constantly grow as you evolve. But why exactly am I telling you this? Well, about a month or two ago, somebody wrote in the comments under one of my videos that they'd like to understand a little bit more what my background is. Like, where did I come from? What are the things that I've done, the experiences that I've had that sort of have led to the point of life where I am right now. And I'm not trying to say that I've somehow made it or anything like that. I'm just a random dude on a YouTube channel. And quite the contrary, actually. I'm constantly learning myself. That's the whole point behind staying curious. And I've actually had so many attempts at tons of different projects, and all of them were fun at some point in time during the process. But to be honest, a whole bunch of them were absolute failures. And I don't mean failures in the sense that I kind of lost tons of money or went bankrupt, but they just didn't turn out to be as good or as interesting to people as I originally thought they would be. Sure, I probably must have lost some money along the way because I invested money in certain projects, but yeah, I mean, nothing too serious. Anyway, today's video is going to be completely different from what I usually publish on my channel. And it's quite possible that it's going to completely tank because it's not related to AI at all. Because you see, the way the YouTube algorithm works is that it tends to optimize towards a certain niche or topic or a cluster of topics that particular people will watch on a recurring basis. And if you introduce sort of external content that is not really related, then there's a high likelihood that people are not going to watch it because it's not what they're expecting. And or YouTube shows the video, the thumbnail, to a group of people who are just not looking for this type of content. And then, yeah, it just doesn't commingle well with specific channels. So for example, on my channel, if I start talking about something that is completely unrelated to AI, then in all likelihood, it will not perform well. And it kind of comes down to which proportion of my subscribers are mainly interested in just AI content in general, and which part of those subscribers are actually more interested in what I have to say on a whole bunch of different topics. Anyway, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I've basically been curious my entire life. And I know it's a bit cliche to say this, that whatever I'm doing right now is somehow related to stuff that I did as a kid. But you know what? It's actually true. In fact, I think if you look at pretty much anyone where they are right now in life and then dig into their childhood, you'll probably find tons of evidence that explains why they are the way they are today or what they're interested in today. And, I spent most of my childhood being an average sort of kid, doing what an average kid does. But I think it was pretty clear from the very beginning that I enjoyed drawing. I mean, I wouldn't say I was an artistic genius. I'm not a professional illustrator or anything. Not at all. Not at all. Like I can draw like a tiny bit, but I'm not like a great drawer. But what I think is pretty clear, and most people will probably attest to this, is that I've been creating stuff my entire life. I just enjoyed creating stuff. Doesn't matter what it was usually related to something creative, sort of be it design or whatever. And I've always had a pretty good eye for design, or it was related to something with computers. Around 1995, 96, when I was 13 years old. That's when I was blessed with, getting the first computer in our house, which was a 486 DX2 running Windows 3.1. I think people who got their first computers around the same time will be able to relate. Anyway, I was living in Canada at the time, in Montreal. Go Habs. And I remember how we were dialing up into the internet using, I think it was Prodigy at the time, and just that whole process was so wild. And initially, my neighbors, as my friends, and I were mostly attracted by the prospect of playing video games, multiplayer. I don't know, Wolfenstein 3D, but I think you couldn't play that 3D, but Doom and stuff like that. And Command and Conquer was a huge thing back then. And so we actually somehow, I don't really know how this happened, but we slipped into this process or this phase of building our own website. And it wasn't on GeoCities, but I think we did it on AngelFire. And we learned how to write HTML. Like, super amazing experience, super interesting. Everything was new. It felt like you were coding, though we all know that HTML isn't a programming language per se. But we built our own Command and Conquer website. Now, the website was completely hideous, of course, with all the flashing, blinking animations and stuff like that. I think you still had was it Netscape and Internet Explorer badges back then. And even though it was like a really shitty website, we did manage to get into Yahoo. And for all of the people out there who are not familiar with how search engines worked back then, Yahoo was not actually a search engine per se, it was a directory, right? And you had to submit your site and then you would get it in or not. So completely different from what Google or any other search engine works like today. Anyway, so as I grew older, so did all my experience with anything related to IT and computers. And we then moved back to Europe. And that was around the time when I started to learn how to use Adobe Photoshop. I'm not going to tell you how I got my hands on Photoshop. I'm sure you all know. And this was a huge step for me because it just allowed me to create so much better websites as well. And it was also around that time that I started to teach myself to code. So I initially started with Visual Basic. Then I went on to Delphi. And eventually I moved on to web development. And, I know it's like all over the place, but, you're exploring, right? You don't really know yet what you want to do. And learning how to write in PHP was a massive enabler then for me because just opened up the world of dynamic websites, dynamic content, which is kind of self-explanatory nowadays, but back then it was not. Even though I was mostly building these sort of pet project websites, I think like the first initial sparks of entrepreneurial sort of mindset were coming through because, I would set up my fan pages and then I would put on these banner ads on the sites. And I mean, they weren't making tons of money, but these were the first internet dollars that I made. So I was like in my mid-teens, 16, 17, and I was making my first dollars. And you should have seen the look on my parents' faces when the first checks came in, and most of them coming from the States as well, which was weird enough already, especially because in Europe, you can cash in a check, but even back then, it was kind of unheard of because nobody really used checks anymore, except for France. I think they still do in some cases. Anyway, so the amounts I was making weren't like huge. It was maybe a couple $1,000s, but they were big enough for my parents to think that I was doing something really illegal on the web. And yeah, but they kind of sort of understood after I explained it to them, and I just continued to improve my coding skills. But there was sort of this common theme throughout the entire time. I was so consumed with constantly learning different things and new things all the time because it was so exciting that I never actually niche down or specialize to the point of actually gaining mastery in any of them. So I was your classic jack of all trades. I was far better than most of the people with regards to anything related to IT and computers, but I was never really a pro. And things got a little bit more complicated after graduating from high school, because let's face it, as long as you're a student or like you're going to school, you can pretty much do whatever you want. With very little consequence, you can learn left and right. Doesn't matter because you're not making any money and you don't need to make any money. But when it's time to go to university, well, that's when shit got real. In all honesty, I had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do. I mean, of course, initially it seemed like a total no-brainer to just get into computer science and get a degree in that because, it was what I was doing anyway all the time. But something really deep down inside of me kind of told me that was not necessarily the thing for me because I didn't want to become you're like your diehard, I don't know, systems administrator, whatever. I had like this weird idea of what a computer science degree would eventually lead to. And at some point during dinner, my parents sort of asked me whether I could imagine creating my own business one day. And I said, yes, definitely I could, because I was creating stuff all the time already, trying to make money online as a teenager. Now, I'm not particularly sure whether my parents had sort of entrepreneurship or, self-employment in mind, or whether they were just trying to, find a way of convincing me to get a safe degree. You see, because my parents are relatively risk-averse people, or they definitely fall into that category of risk-averseness. Because my dad's a civil servant, and it really doesn't get much more risk-averse than that. And that sort of has been given down to me to a certain extent as well into my DNA. Anyway, so I actually ended up going to a classic university in Germany initially for the first 2 years. But I did quickly realize that it was just too much theory for my taste. And I wanted something that had more of a practical approach, because it's just the way that I learn. So I actually switched to a French business school and ended up getting my master's degree in management there. And I did all of the internships that you'd expect somebody to do if you're studying business. I spent 3 months at JP Morgan in London, and afterwards did 2 3-month internships at A.T. Kearney and a German consultancy called Roland Berger. And strategy consulting kind of seemed like the perfect fit, not just for me, but for many other of my co-students. If you don't really know what you want to do and what you're interested in, consulting is really, really great to get into things, because you're always busy. You're always working on something else. You don't really have time to think about what you like. And plus the money is really good. And there's that certain prestige factor, which will definitely keep your family, parents, and relatives happy. Something to tell the neighbors about. So I actually got an offer from Roland Berger after my internship, and I decided to accept it in 2007. But I told them that I wanted to go on my backpacking trip through Southeast Asia first, before I start working. So when I returned in April of 2008, all hell broke loose. I think the financial crisis was in full swing, and literally they were letting everybody go. They let me go before I even started to work. I didn't even work a single day, and they let me go. Got like a tiny severance package. It's easy to get rid of somebody who's not even started. And to be honest, it was totally devastating. You've been working all of this time to get that perfect job, and then it just comes crumbling down, and you're like, what the hell is going on? But hey, what are you gonna do? So after that, I spent most of my time just writing applications, preparing for assessment centers. I was based in Berlin at that time, and I was applying to so many different companies, literally everything under the sun. So was everybody else, which didn't make it easy. But you see, there's only so much applying that you can do. At some point, there's just nobody else to apply to. And you get tired, or you're waiting for a response, and you've got a lot of time on your hands. And so that's when I started to dabble in print on demand. So since I was still very much interested in graphics design, I was doing lots of stuff just for fun on the side. I decided to upload the first couple of designs on a site called Spreadshirt, which is, by now I think pretty much everybody, or a lot of people know about Spreadshirt, but back in the day it was just this German startup, mostly just based in Europe. And I was curious to see whether you could actually make money with this. And this was in 2009, and print on demand was just getting started. It was not as big as it is today. And you should have seen my face when I literally made my first sale only a couple of days after uploading my first designs. That was the switch just flipped. I just couldn't believe it. This wasn't the first dollar I made on the internet, but it was the first dollar I'd made in a while on the internet. And so with so much time on my hands, I decided, okay, let me focus on creating more designs. Let's see if I can scale this a little bit. And of course, I continued to apply for jobs, and relatively quickly, I got an offer from Royal Dutch Shell and from Bosch, But since I wasn't too keen on, starting my career in a tiny little town of southern Germany with, I don't know, barely any inhabitants, I decided to take the job at Shell and move to Hamburg, which is the second largest city in Germany. But here's the kicker. So by the time I had accepted that job and started working, I was already making $1,500 on Spreadshirt every month, just on my own. And I think discovering print on demand was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because you see, I inherited this risk averseness from my parents, but I was also sort of always desperate to build my own business. And obviously those two things don't really mix very well. So print on demand basically allowed me to pursue this urge, which was entrepreneurial in nature, without all of the risk that was associated with actually starting your own business. And it also taught me so much about online marketing, e-commerce, search engine optimization, keyword research, everything you kind of need for making money online today. So while I was working full-time, my regular job at Shell, I was spending a lot of my free time trying to create new designs and figuring out how I could automate this process as much as possible so that it wouldn't affect my main job. And my knack for design obviously helped me along the way, but so did my relatively decent coding skills as well. So I was actually able to find or build solutions that would allow me to scale this up. And at its peak, which was around 2012, I was making around $100,000 in royalties just from Spreadshirt alone. And this was next to my main job. But of course, as these things become well known, competition tends to pick up, the numbers fluctuate, they go up, but they also come down again. And that's one of the reasons why I continued to stick with my regular job. But another reason was also that I was given the amazing opportunity to actually go to South Africa for 2 years for Shell. But throughout all these years, I was basically constantly working on some sort of an exit strategy. The only problem is that as you progress within your career, obviously your compensation does go up. See, the grip that your safe corporate job has on you just continues to grow and grow, especially when you are adjusting your lifestyle and you're spending according to your compensation. Something that I luckily mostly did not do. But at some point, this unique combination of feeling slightly unappreciated for the work that I was doing, but also this urge to just finally give it a damn try, led to me actually handing in my resignation. And I was around 34 years old at the time, and I figured that if I need to give it a try now, because if I don't do it now, then I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life, and I will never know what would have happened if I had tried. And I also knew that since I did still have my income from my side hustle with print on demand, I was actually not jumping into a whole, I was sacrificing a lot of income, but I still had income to make it easier to actually start out. So I quit my job in 2017 with absolutely no business model. And I think a lot of people looked at me and thought, is he insane? But you know what? If you don't have a clear head, it's difficult to come up with an idea that actually makes sense. And a little later that year, I launched a print-on-demand design platform called Threadbasket. It still exists today. So things really took off right off the bat. We were profitable from more or less day one. And that was mainly due to the novelty of it all, as well as the fact that my business partner had and still has one of the biggest Facebook groups dedicated to merch. So distribution was not a problem initially. This was also the moment when I realized that you can have the very best product in the world, but if you do not have distribution, it almost doesn't matter because you're not going to get it in front of eyeballs. And we launched, and I think we launched in late 2017. And by the end of 2018, we actually hit like $30,000 in, well, I wouldn't say MRR because it wasn't really recurring in that sense because it was all once-off sales, but we hit 30,000 in revenue that month in December. And that was also the point where I started making our first mistakes as well. So for some reason, we thus thought that we needed to have employees and that we need to have a co-working space, all the cool bells and whistles that come with a startup, right? So we were trying to expand with no real plan, and when our sales suddenly dropped by 50% within 2 months, we were about to get into real trouble. And long story short, Threadbasket still exists today, but we never really got back to the original highs from back then. So overall, we've done like around $850,000 in revenue over a span of 6 years, which kind of puts it into perspective. But we didn't really make any money on it because most of that revenue went back into developing the platform and creating new designs. It was a relatively capital-intensive sort of business model. I mean, not really that capital-intensive, but in relation to the kind of money that you could make. The business model just wasn't scalable, and it's, scaling is particularly difficult when you need to keep an eye on profitability. If you've got tons of money from investors and profitability doesn't really matter at the beginning, then you could just burn through cash and grow, and growth is all that matters to them. So during this downward trend, I also continued to pursue my own projects on the side. I launched my first information product, the Heidorn Report, which is a bi-weekly research and strategy publication for merch and print on demand, and that still exists today. And it all started with a random experiment in one of our Facebook groups and just continued to grow from there. And I learned so much about writing sales copy, sales funnels, and so much more. The things that you don't necessarily learn at school or at university, at least not if you're pursuing a business degree. And you need to have that curiosity to try new things and learn as you go. So you're seeing that recurring theme with the curiosity. Well, you see, one thing that you do learn at university when you study business is that every product has a product life cycle. And in 2021, I started to notice that my main product was starting to reach its plateau. And this makes sense because its novelty had started to wear off. And if I'm entirely honest, my interest in the product had also been fading as well over time. So I realized that I needed something new to get excited about, but I didn't really know what. I knew that there were a couple topics in the tech space that I found interesting, but I didn't know enough about them to just jump into a new business model or anything like that. So that's when I decided to launch my Tokenized blog. And as I researched different topics, I would write about them and post blogs on the site. And after writing one blog a day about various different tech-related topics for close to 9 months, my blog had gone through so many ups and downs. It had basically gone up way beyond 100K visitors per month, back down to 50K. Then I thought I had sort of recovered, and then it crashed again. And, it's all these ups and downs, and with the associated effect on your ad revenue as well. And at the same time, while your main product and main source of income is sort of plateauing and coming to the end of its life cycle. But then around August, September, I stumbled upon Midjourney, this generative AI sort of thing that I had kind of heard of, but I hadn't really played around with. Now, you might remember that at the beginning of this video, I said that I always had a knack for design and for tech throughout my entire life. And Midjourney felt like the perfect combination of both of them, because obviously there's the visual aspect with, you're creating images and designs and all that, but there's also a very technical aspect to Midjourney because, you're writing it with a command line, basically. It's not coding, right? But you're entering commands into a prompt. And with all of these different parameters and variables and everything, it's quite technical for a lot of people. So I thought there must be value in creating educational content for this. And this became more and more obvious to me as the blog traffic continued to grow. And then in early December, I decided, well, let's do something that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, but I just didn't have the right topic for. Let's start a YouTube channel. So starting this YouTube channel was a complete experiment. I'm going to be honest. I've been wanting to do this for so many years, but there has never been anything that I felt comfortable enough or also interested enough in to actually do it. So for years, I had just simply not had the guts. And I was far too worried about what people would think, what they would say. And well, yeah, now 6 months later and more than 50,000 subscribers, I guess it doesn't feel that uncomfortable anymore. So I'm still writing my blog posts on the blog, and those generate ad revenue. Then my videos here, those generate some ad revenue as well. And pretty soon I'll also be releasing my Midjourney course, which I hope will be equally helpful as the videos that I share here on my channel. Oh, and by the way, if you are interested in the course, make sure that you put yourself onto the waiting list. You can click the link in the description below, and the people who are on that specific list will get informed about the course before anyone else. Anyways, sorry for the really long rant today. This is the first time I've done anything like this. The point I'm trying to make is that curiosity has not only allowed me to continuously expand my skills over time. My curiosity has also helped me learn about new opportunities along the way, and sometimes even much earlier than anyone else or most other people. And once you realize that curiosity leads to experimentation, and that experimentation very often leads to opportunity, then you quickly realize that staying curious is unbelievably important in life. And that's especially true if you want to remain in control of your life. I mean, look at this video. This whole video is an experiment in its own right. I'm recording a type of video I've never done before. I've also never talked about anything like this. And hopefully some of you enjoyed it. And if not, that's all right. But if you did, then I might post more of these in the future as well. Now, if you are interested in this sort of content, then the only thing that I would ask you is to subscribe to this channel that I'm now showing on screen, which is a different one, but also in my name. Because remember what I said at the beginning, that YouTube kind of likes to focus on certain niche clusters. And, it's better to sometimes separate topics. Well, what I talked about today is a slightly different topic than AI, obviously. So this is my sort of beginner attempt at trying to keep these topics separate in different sort of channels, so that I can help YouTube understand who actually wants to see this type of content and who wants to see mostly AI and Midjourney content. All right, so this was a pretty long video. Again, sorry for the lengthy rant, but if you stuck around until this point, then I guess you kind of seem interested, and I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.